Good evening, this is Brass Tacks and Zaka Jacob. The India-Canada diplomatic fallout has now gone into the next gear. India today halted the issue of visas to Canadians who are hoping to travel to India, citing operational constraints because of all the security threats that Indian diplomats are facing in Canada. Not just that, the MEA spokesperson had a press conference today where he's used some very blunt and harsh language, saying if any country in the world should be worried about its reputation, it is Canada, who's fast gaining a reputation as a safe haven for terrorists. Now, this has never been said of any other Western country up until now by India. Now, the next corollary question is going to be, and in diplomacy, it's always about reciprocity. Will Canada follow suit? Within the hour, I believe that Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, will be having a press conference in New York on the sidelines of the UNGA. Two things that will be asked of him. Number one, will there be a reciprocal tit for tat? Will Canada clamp down on visas for Indians, particularly Indian students? And also, it's been 4 days now since he made that dramatic allegation in the Canadian Parliament in public about what he believes, quote unquote, were credible allegations of the involvement of Indian officials in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Will he reveal any more of that credible allegation? What is the evidence he's willing to put in the public domain? And the most important question, and it's very clear now, both countries are on what is called the diplomatic escalation ladder. The question is, who blinks, how do they do it, and how do they get off this escalation chain?
Any involvement of a foreign government in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil is an unacceptable violation of our sovereignty. In the strongest possible terms, I continue to urge the government of India to cooperate with Canada to get to the bottom of this matter.
The issue of safe havens and places to operate is being provided abroad, including in Canada. We would expect that that is the main focus. The question is, do we have the political will to address terrorism, or we want to justify it and condone it?
All right, before we go to our debate, today, of course, is a very big day in parliamentary democracy in India, particularly for 50% of our population. The Women's Reservation Bill was passed by the Lok Sabha yesterday, passed by the Rajya Sabha today, and of course the President will now give her assent before it formally becomes a law. I'm now joined by a very special guest right at the top of Brass Tacks here on CNN News 18, Union Minister for Women and Child Development, Smriti Irani ji is now joining us. Thank you very much, ma'am, for speaking with us and being on
I'm not connected on audio with you.
All right, I hope you can
My
hear
apologies, but I'm not getting the audio feed.
Okay, I hope you can hear me though. All right, we'll try and see. Ma'am, Zaka here, I'm trying to see if
I'm sorry, but I have no audio feed.
Okay. We're trying to see if you can hear me. First of all, many congratulations as the Women and Child Development Minister and somebody who's been in politics for the last 20 years. This must be a particularly pleasing day for you and for all women representatives in Parliament, in state legislatures, that we have now passed this historic legislation, something that has been hanging fire for the last 3 decades or so. As a woman politician, as a woman representative of the people, what does a day like today mean for you? And of course, the fact that you shepherded the bill through the Lok Sabha and now through the Rajya Sabha, and the Modi government has got it done, something that the UPA and the Congress were not able to do. It must be particularly satisfying, but just in the overall historical context, what does a day like today mean for you and other women representatives of people?
This is a great day for us. We are jubilant for plenty of reasons. Firstly, there were some people who were of the opinion that we've been waiting for this decision for 27 years. I want to historically contextualize it. When we attained freedom from colonial rule, that is when many a woman, and this is a historical fact, walked up to those who are writing our constitution, that there is a need to constitutionally guarantee and there is a need for affirmative action for women vis-a-vis reservation. At that time, I'm sure these women recognized what was to transpire in the forthcoming years, but their opinion was not heeded to for some reason. Today is a day to pay homage to them. In the year 1971, the then government wanted to create a report on the status of women in the country then, and so that they can prescribe a policy for such women. That committee was constituted. If you look at the 1974 published report of that committee in chapter 7, I'm very grateful that we find a mention of the Bharatiya Janasangh stating emphatically that there is a need to constitutionally guarantee women in our country an opportunity to serve the country as leaders of tomorrow. And when Prime Minister Modi now brings this legislation to this new building, he brings it with a promise that this building will witness history. Who knew that history will be created? The most glorious chapter for women would be written in the first 72 hours. So I think that the fact that this is a legislation which is very well defined constitutionally, is framed so that the process that is to ensue also is brought to light in front of the people of our country. I think that is why today we celebrate not just the possibility, but the affirmation of reservation for women in our country.
Ma'am, so yesterday in the Lok Sabha, we saw how 454 MPs voted in favor, including all the opposition parties except one. But one demand that they had, most of them, was why is there no quota within quota, OBC quota for women of the OBC category, along with SC and ST reserve seats for women in the overall reservation for women. What would be the government's counter to that?
I think that the forked tongue in which the opposition speaks stands exposed. If you look at their proposal during the UPA era, that makes absolutely no mention of the OBC community, because even they know there is no constitutional provision as such. There is also no constitutional provision for reservation in the name of religion. That in itself is ultra vires of the constitution. There is a defined space for women in the SC/ST categories and reservation prescribed for them in the bill that Prime Minister Modi has passed in the Lok Sabha, which is waiting passage in the Rajya Sabha. There is also a defined timeline. If you look at the Congress's proposal by Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, in page 2B and 3B, you will find shockingly that what Sonia Gandhi had proposed was that women from the SC/ST and other women per se will not receive reservation for 15 years. In fact, she had curtailed the reservation to only 10 years. What is shocking more so is that the bill that was proposed by Sonia Gandhi had absolutely no constitutional process that was prescribed as to how you will reach a conclusion as to which seat is to be reserved where. This bill that has been passed in the Lok Sabha and is waiting passage as we speak in the Rajya Sabha defines the constitutional procedure for reservation. And I think that is why there was a deliberate attempt by the Congress party to ensure that the bill does not pass in the Lok Sabha when the Congress had numbers in government from 2010 to 14. And today there's a deliberate attempt for them to create a constitutional anomaly by demanding things that the Constitution doesn't permit.
Ma'am, and the other point of contention that was raised by many of the opposition speakers yesterday and today was, if this is going to get implemented only post the 2026 census and thereafter delimitation, and perhaps the earliest general election where this can be implemented is to 2029 general election, then why was the government in such a hurry to bring it in this session and in 2023?
Naka, you will appreciate that we will go into elections in a few months, hence a legislation that seeks a constitutional procedure vis-a-vis how processes and methodologies have to be laid out for delimitation, which will need a special emphasis and a whole implementation strategy by center and state, by also census. I think the process is so wide and the process is so cumbersome that if not today, when would the opposition have wanted the bill to come through?
All right, and one final word.
We would not give the nation the process and procedurally the organizations that have been constitutionally ordained for the process to prepare.
Yeah, go on. Finish your point. There was audio in between.
And I also think this whole obfuscation of the fact that why 26, Look at Article 82. My appeal to every viewer of your program right now. The Constitution is available digitally. Please read your own Constitution. In Article 82, it is clearly stated that the first published census after 2026 is when this particular process of readjustment and realignment of states of seats by the delimitation process can be undertaken. So there are only two reasons why the opposition has misled the country, and especially the Gandhi family. Either they have not read the Constitution, or they have read the Constitution and want to deliberately dissuade the women of our country.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Many congratulations once again as a representative of the people. It indeed must be particularly satisfying that you were able to shepherd through.
It is a day of joy not only for women, but also men and families particularly that have supported women in their lives to contribute to nation building, supported the aspirations and ambitions of women. And I'm particularly joyful that this is a day for young women who are our leaders of tomorrow. We look upon you now to lead us to a greater future.
All right. Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us right at the top of brass tacks here on CNN News 18. That was the Union Women and Child Development Minister, Smriti Irani, with her thoughts and comments on how long this process took and the fact that the Modi government was able to pass this bipartisan legislation by almost near unanimous majority. In fact, in the Lok Sabha yesterday, it was 454 members of parliament who voted in favor of this, just 2 against. So it shows that even in such divided times, there are issues where our polity can come together. And it is of particular satisfaction that in the new parliament building, this will be the first major legislation that is passed. And that, of course, is one for the history books. Let's now shift focus to our big debate tonight. And that, of course, is the fallout of the India-Canada diplomatic showdown that's been brewing ever since the Canadian Prime Minister made those very, very serious charges in the Canadian Parliament a few days ago without giving any evidence, not just yet. Now, the fallout of it, India has clearly drawn the red line. Today, it's gone into the next gear. The MEA has put out a counter to the allegations that have been put out by Justin Trudeau, saying it is politically driven, it's politically motivated. India has also responded to Canada and shared inputs from time to time on those Khalistani elements who are operating in Canadian soil. There's been no crackdown. This is what the MEA spokesperson said. There's been no crackdown on these elements who are working from and working in Canadian soil. Now, the Indian community in Canada is also facing threats. Remember, this has, of course, driven a wedge between those few who support this whole Khalistan idea in Canada and the rest of the peace-loving Indo-Canadian community. Canada is becoming a safe haven for terror and for organized crime. Our missions, and this is again the fallout of it, India has today halted visas for Canadians who intend to travel to India. They have said that our missions are unable to operate because of the security threats that they are facing. Everyone, including the Indian High Commissioner operating in Ottawa, has a target on his back because of these Khalistan protests and these Khalistan threats. Now, security concerns are forcing the government of India, says it, to pause the visa process for Canadians who intend to travel to India. Concerns over Canadian interference as well in the internal affairs of India. Canada should be concerned about its reputation. Also gave full support to Justin Trudeau when he was here at the G20 and that whole malfunction that his plane had, but the Canadian side refused an Indian airplane to go back. Now, what the first immediate and major fallout of this entire diplomatic showdown has been the halt of visas for Canadians. Now, you may have many questions in your mind as to, if you are planning to go to Canada or if you have a Canadian visa, then what happens? Now, question number one, what happens to my current visa? If you already have a Canadian visa, or if you're a Canadian who has an Indian visa, then there is no bar on your travel for valid Indian visa holders. You can continue to travel if you already have an existing visa stamp on your passport. Number two, in terms of our frequently asked questions, can I travel to Canada? If you have an existing visa, a valid visa on your passport, yes, there is no bar for Indian travelers. And if you intend to get a Canadian visa, so far at least, the Canadian side has not reciprocated this visa ban. Therefore, you can still apply to get a visa to go to Canada. Now, can students or workers who are either studying in Canada or who've gone to work in Canada for a temporary amount of time, can they return from Canada? Can they come to India? And yes, the answer is there is no bar for those people who have a valid visa to enter India. Now, will OCI card holders or persons of Indian origin, will they face issues? These are Canadian citizens, but also of Indian origin who have overseas citizens of India cards with them. They will not face any entry problems because they have OCI cards, and currently the ban is only for, or at least the halt is for visas. Can Canadians enter India via other nations? That's a curiously interesting question, and the answer to that question, of course, is there is no bar for anyone who has a valid visa to enter India through a third country as well. Now, amid this diplomatic showdown, now there is a member of Mr. Trudeau's Liberal Party who has come out, again a Canadian member of Parliament of Indian origin, who's come out, Chandra Arya, and lambasted Trudeau for the inaction of his government against these radical Khalistani elements. Chandra Arya, who is an MP from Trudeau's Liberal Party, has said, and I quote, "The SFJ chief, that is Pannu, had targeted Hindus just a few days ago. He told them to leave Canada and return to India." Now, Pannu is operating in Canada right now. That statement that he made from a couple of days ago was in Canada, asking Canadians to leave. Many are fearful of targeted attacks, and this is particularly the Indo-Canadian Hindu community there. He's urged all of them to report Hindu phobia. Chandra Arya has urged the Hindu Canadian community to report any instances of Hindu phobia that they face. A majority of Canadian Sikhs do not support separatism. He's also gone on to say that further escalation of past temple attacks are likely to happen as well. Also, he has said there is glorification of terrorism that's being allowed in the name of Khalistan and in the name of political compulsions, really, by Justin Trudeau's government. The separatists are getting away with hate crimes. They cannot digest the success of Hindu Canadians, and that is why they are ratcheting up the political rhetoric. Hindu Canadians considered soft targets. Now, we're getting a piece of breaking news, and I need to go to that right now because this is an important one. Remember, top government sources are telling CNN News 18 that National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and his counterpart, the Canadian counterpart, have been discussing this and have always discussed issues of security that concern both countries, especially that is terrorism that emanates from Canada. Many times in the past, NSA Doval, while meeting his counterpart, has clearly and categorically told his Canadian counterpart that there are troublemakers, there are terrorists, there are Khalistani radical elements who are sitting in Canada. Doval has shared multiple times intelligence intercepts from time to time, including locations, the statements, the criminal activity of these people who are operating from Canadian soil. On the other hand, his counterpart has also raised what he feels are issues of Indian involvement in Canada, to which the National Security Advisor of India, Mr. Doval, has clearly told his counterpart that please provide hard evidence, please provide the charge sheets of the FIRs. The Canadian NSA had promised to do so in occasions in the past when they met, but they've never come back with any concrete evidence on these claims. And the blames that India is ready to investigate this matter deeply if there are credible inputs given. So there are two parts to this story. One, how the NSA, Ajit Doval, has repeatedly told his Canadian counterpart about the activities of these suspicious characters, and there are a host of them. There's in fact a dossier that's been given to the Canadians. And two, on the Canadian allegation that there is Indian involvement in Canadian domestic affairs or Canadian internal affairs, the gauntlet has been thrown at them saying, please provide us evidence and we are willing to take action. Anand Narasimhan, my colleague, is now joining us. So Anand, on both those counts, the NSA has made it clear in the past and will continue to make India's position clear. But do we know, and are we any closer to knowing, has there been any sort of formal or informal contact at the level of the NSAs after this controversy broke out?
But so far it doesn't seem so, and it looks like India is not going to till the time Trudeau climbs down and publicly climbs down and publicly retracts the statement that he's made. So he will have to make a statement in Parliament to de-escalate. Him trying to say that we do not want to escalate matters does not settle it. Mind you, only yesterday we had the NSA Ajit Doval in Parliament having a meeting with the Home Minister. And today we have seen what India has done in terms of trying to say that, listen, if this is how you're going to be, you are talking about credible allegations, we are giving you credible proof. Zaka, to all our viewers, today Sukha, a known gangster and with Kaling Zipcha, has been gunned down in Canada. And on social media, the Lawrence Bishnoi gang has taken ownership of it. And Lawrence Bishnoi's associate Goldie Brar operates out of Canada. And Goldie Brar is the prime accused and wanted in the assassination of another Indian rapper, because of which this whole entire K menace once again resurfaced in Punjab. And the Canadian authorities have done nothing about it. They do not even they have not even apprehended the killers of Hardeep Nijjar for them to even say that there is Indian involvement. So at all levels, we have provided them letter rogatories, Interpol's red corner notice with Hardeep Nijjar, with Goldie Brar, with the Bambiha gang associates. So many letter rogatories have been given, and this is something which NSA Ajit Doval has repeatedly underlined with the Canadian NSA, and they have never responded with any credible proof for all the claims that they make. So it's all in the air as far as the Canadians are concerned. India's got hard proof, and the Canadians have done nothing so far.
All right, we'll see how this plays out diplomatically. And of course, the onus really is on Justin Trudeau, his government, to provide credible evidence to back his claim of credible allegations of Indian involvement in the murder of Hardeep Nijjar. Let me now open this up to our guests who are joining us. Full panel tonight on Brass Tacks, and we're going to go all the way to the top of 10. Puneet Sahni, Sikh activist, is now joining us. Terry Miliuski is the author of Blood for Blood. Michael Baker is a former CIA operative and the host of the President's Daily Brief. Professor Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert, a regular here on CNN News 18. Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, again a CNN News 18 regular. Carson Jurima is a political columnist with the National Post in Canada. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Let me start off with Terry Miliuski. There is now a real sort of consequence or a real fallout beginning to take shape after those allegations that Justin Trudeau made in the Canadian Parliament a few days ago. The visas for Canadians has been put on halt. Of course, you had the MEA spokesperson come out today, the Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson come out today and say, we're doing this because there are operational constraints, and the operational constraints are because our diplomats have targets on their backs, because they have very serious security threats that they're facing. Therefore, we're having to downsize, and that's why the temporary halt on visa processing for Canadians. Is there a feeling now in Canada that this is getting real, this is hitting closer home, and that they need to dial down? Or is it that Mr. Trudeau has gone public, he's dialed up, he's ratcheted up the rhetoric, and he's not going to climb down?
I certainly think that the Canadians are really paying attention for the first time in a long time because of the seriousness of what's going on. This escalation is real, it affects real people's lives. They're starting to become concerned that maybe the Prime Minister has made a hash of things. Already, this is against the back. I don't mean to be unkind, but this is against the background where, as we all know, the Prime Minister is at a low ebb in the polls. He's already politically on thin ice. He was humiliated at the G20 in New Delhi by Mr. Modi. He comes home and he needs a way to strike back. He's chosen this way, and he has still not put any flesh on the bones. He has not shown us the evidence, and he must do that in order to maintain his credibility. He doesn't have, I'm saying, a reservoir of public credibility that would help him to get through this, that people would stay with him even though he hasn't produced the evidence. However, let me add one other point, and that is that we are not hearing, amidst all this noise, these distractions to some degree about visas and students and graffiti on Hindu temples and the like. We are not hearing from the Indian side that they must know something. In fact, they must know quite a lot about what the Canadians are alleging. They've been meeting for weeks about all of this. Trudeau sat down with Modi and said he talked to him in no uncertain terms, I quote, about what he was alleging. And I do not imagine, none of us will imagine, that Mr. Modi sat there like a potted plant and didn't ask questions. What are you alleging? Where is your evidence? What have you got? So he must know, if Trudeau won't say, Mr. Modi must know a good deal about what the Canadians are alleging, but I do not hear him saying, look, this is what they're saying, and it's nonsense because X
Okay.
and Y. Here are my reasons for saying it's absurd. I would like to hear that too. It takes two to tango. They've both painted themselves into corners. Mr. Modi by saying it's absurd. Okay, so show us. He doesn't have to wait. He doesn't have to wait because he knows something of what Trudeau is alleging. So there is more to learn about this.
Let me just divide the discussion into two parts. I want to first deal with the diplomatic fallout because I think that has very real world consequences for people, Canadians who want to travel to India, Indians who want to travel to Canada. And I want to ask Ashok Sajjanhar, as a former diplomat, today India has decided to halt visas, all visas, long-term, short-term, all visas for Canadians who want to travel to India. In diplomacy, and you know this very well, sir, that there is reciprocity. What are the chances you believe that Canada might reciprocate with a similar ban on Indian visas? And if they do so, what may the fallout of that be? Because you have Indian students going there, you have people going there on PR, particularly after COVID. I know a lot of people who've gone there on permanent residency to Canada. What may the fallout of that be? And what may be the mitigating factor for Canada from not reciprocating this decision? All right, Ashok Sajjanhar, please give me a moment. I'm going to go live. I believe Justin Trudeau is speaking at a press conference in New York on the sidelines of the UNGA on exactly this.
Des Canadiens et les principes de règles de droit. As I said on Monday, there are credible reasons to believe that agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil. That is something of the utmost and foundational importance in a country of rule of law, in a world where international rules-based order matters. We have a rigorous and independent justice system and robust processes that will follow their course. And we call upon the government of India to engage with us to move forward on getting to the truth of this matter.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. Mackenzie Gray with Global News. So far, none of the U.S., UK, Australia, or New Zealand have echoed the allegations about India. We know you gave a heads up to some of those world leaders. Did you ask them to publicly condemn New Delhi? As a country of the rule of law, we have an obligation to ensure that those processes unfold in a rigorous and independent manner, and that is what we are ensuring. At the same time, we are ensuring that Canadians stay protected and that we stand up for the international rules-based order. That is something that we are doing, and it's something we are doing alongside our allies. But so far at this point in time, you seem to be alone in echoing these allegations. Are you concerned that Canadian allies have not gone nearly as far as you in this situation? We're standing up for the rules-based order. We're standing up for the rule of law. We're highlighting how unacceptable it would be for any country to be involved in the killing of a citizen on their own home soil. And that's something we will continue to stand for.
Prime Minister, since you made your statement in the House of Commons the other day, some of the reactions, some of the conversation's been about the quality of the evidence, how much Canada has. You said it was credible. Can I ask you to characterize it just a little bit further about how extensive it is, how solid it is, and whether you might ever share some of that with the public? So how extensive is this evidence?
I think it's extremely important that as a country with a strong and independent justice system, we allow those justice processes to unfold themselves with the utmost integrity. But I can assure you, the decision to share these allegations on the floor of the House of Commons Monday morning was not done lightly. It was done with, or Monday afternoon, was done with the utmost seriousness.
All right, that was Justin Trudeau. He's not shared any new evidence, or he's not backed up his claims of these allegations of Indian government agents being involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, allegedly. He's not provided any evidence to back that claim. But Ashok Sajjanhar, you want to weigh in on what Justin Trudeau said?
You know, frankly, Zaka, I would have thought that after Justin Trudeau made that allegation, and he spoke of credible allegations. I've had opportunity to say on your program, on your channel, that there are no credible allegations. An allegation is just an allegation. You add credibility when there is evidence, and he's not been able to give any evidence. And I think the whole world is asking, like all these journalists, they were asking, but even as far as the partners of Canada, they've also been asking, where is the evidence and why are you jumping the gun without completing the investigation? The investigation is still going on. And, there is no one who's been arrested. There is no charge sheet that's been filed. And, this seems to be a baseless allegation. And for Justin Trudeau to compound that error, I think he made a blunder by coming out in the open like this without the investigation having got completed.
Okay.
And now to come here and again repeat the same thing, I think it doesn't help matters at all. He is shooting himself again in the foot and painting himself again in a corner, which will be very difficult for him to get out of when he wants to do that, when it will become necessary for him to do that.
He again keeps saying our processes are independent, judicial processes, they are rigorous. What we want is for the government of India to take this matter with utmost seriousness and to cooperate with us to bring to justice the people who were responsible for Nijjar's death. Do you see any toning down from the statement that he made on Monday, or have you seen anything more by way of information or perspective in what he's saying today that might add to some of the credibility of the allegations that he's making?
First, there are growing calls within Canada for him to come clean with some hard evidence to back his allegation. But again today, he just repeated his earlier words, but by repeatedly emphasizing rules-based order, rule of law, he was in fact exposing his own hypocrisy. Just a few months ago, when the Americans assassinated al-Zawahiri in Kabul, Trudeau tweeted about this and in fact extolled the assassination of al-Zawahiri. In fact, if you look at the number of assassinations that have happened in the world since World War II, which countries have conducted the largest number of assassinations? Not authoritarian regimes, not China, not Russia, not North Korea.
I have to go.
It is Western liberal democracies, and that's the irony of the fact that he talks about rules-based order, respect for rule of law, but to the larger question about India-Canada relations, the spiral, the downward spiral in relations between Canada and India needs to be arrested, because it's neither in the interest of Canada or India that the relations continue to worsen. I think through quiet diplomacy, they should find ways to arrest this downward spiral in relations.
I absolutely agree. There is a diplomatic escalation chain on which both countries have climbed on, and they need to find a way to get off that escalatory ladder. But I want to ask Michael Baker, as a former person involved in intelligence, the Indian and Canadian sides have had intelligence sharing for a number of years now. There was direct sharing of intelligence cooperation that's been going on between both countries for the better part of at least a decade now, if not more. Surely the Canadians, if they had credible intelligence about the involvement of Indian government agents, as Mr. Trudeau put it, in the assassination of Hardeep Nijjar, surely they would have shared it with their Indian counterparts. Mr. Trudeau says he brought it directly to Prime Minister Modi when he was here at the G20 just a few days ago. After having done that, what do you think made him go public with it? Because I can't remember the last time the head of government, of any government, a democracy at that, stood up in a parliament and made such grave allegations about a foreign government.
Yeah, I agree with your other guests. They've made the point that this is in a sense, on one level, it's a political blunder on Trudeau's part. And it's operationally odd that if they have serious allegations, the way to conduct this would have been off the radar screen, meaning between the intel services, between the governments, quietly. They would present the evidence and they would handle this. But for Trudeau to come out in what I think was already been pointed out as sort of shooting his own foot, a self-inflicted wound. It's a very strange situation. And the problem here is it's not just impacting, the escalating rhetoric isn't just impacting the Canadian Indian governments, right? I mean, it's a bigger world and we're all interconnected.
Yep.
And so now you have, as an example, the U.S. administration struggling to figure out how do you deal with this, and the British government, how do you take sides? You can't, because the allegations are just simply that. And it's been pointed out, there's no such thing as a credible allegation. You have an allegation, and then once you make that allegation, you present your operational evidence. You present what you have to back that up. That's what's missing. If they've done it off the radar screen, that's fine, but they're creating this firestorm unnecessarily.
Let me ask Carson Jerema, and domestically speaking, the most plausible explanation I've heard, Carson, as to why Trudeau has done what he has done is because of the political compulsions, how his coalition is dependent on Jagmeet Singh's party, and they are, in bed with the Khalistani radicals and so on. But it still doesn't fully explain to me, why would a prime minister put a serious diplomatic relationship literally under the bus? Why would he throw it under the bus just for domestic political survival? It just doesn't add up. As the previous speaker said, it's not just a government-to-government problem now. There are very serious real-world people consequences because of what Mr. Trudeau did.
Well, I think maybe the consequences weren't thought out. Yeah, fully factored in. I do think that the government operates on a sort of a short-term basis. It's constantly like as Terry Milewski pointed out, like they were low in the polls, had a lot of bad press. They often do this sort of thing where they make a big flashy announcement in order to sort of change the channel. Earlier this year there was allegations that the Chinese government was interfering in Canadian elections. And the federal government just decided to dismiss those allegations and dismissed it for weeks and weeks and weeks, despite more and more information coming out. And the calculation at that time was because they thought they could paint the opposition conservatives negatively. I just think that maybe they didn't fully factor it in. I don't want to say that the federal government does not care about international politics, but it certainly has its domestic issue front and center, and the other stuff is secondary. And it does seem to be looking for a way to. It does seem to be that whether or not the allegation is true or not, the way that he presented it does seem to be calculated based on the domestic political situation. So
Ashok Sajjanhar, I know you need to leave, so I'll ask you this question as well, and then I'll come to you, Puneet Sahni. Thanks for your patience. The critical thing is, if Mr. Trudeau is saying the intelligence operatives have shared this with their Indian counterparts, and he's saying he shared it personally and directly with Prime Minister Modi when he was here at the G20, and despite that, if he chose to go public, and the Indian response now to halt visas, which is clearly climbing up the escalation ladder, either India has seen that evidence, whatever it is that Mr. Trudeau personally told Mr. Modi, and come to the conclusion that it's not credible enough, and therefore they are ratcheting this up because there has to be a price to pay for anyone to make such grave allegations about another democracy like this. So do you reckon the reason why India today notched it up one notch further by halting visas is perhaps because India knows that at least whatever has been presented to them by the Canadian side, there isn't enough meat on the bone, as Terry Milewski said, for any kind of action to be taken from the Indian side, that they realize that they can climb up the diplomatic escalation ladder because there is a cost to pay.
No, absolutely. I think there is nothing that, for India to do, but also there is nothing that Canada has in hand to be able to share it with its allies. There have been two other pieces of information that have come up. Number one is that the issue was raised with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister completely rejected all these allegations.
Yep.
One of your panelists was saying as to, why doesn't the Prime Minister come out? I don't think it is for the Prime Minister really to come out. Prime Minister's office, or I think the External Affairs Minister, or, the spokesperson, they have said it was completely rejected by the Prime Minister. And the second is what the official spokesperson said today, that there is no substantive information that has been shared with us. So we know that they have nothing in hand. If they had something in hand, Zaka, there would have been some arrest that would have been made. There would have been some charge sheet that would have been filed. It's already 3 months since that assassination took place, since that murder took place.
Yep.
There is nothing for on the about the intelligence agencies. The last point I would like to make there is that the Canadian NSA was also here during the G20. Mr. Doval had a meeting with him, and he told him in no uncertain terms. And if after all this still the Canadian Prime Minister goes about saying, making all these allegations, obviously he is not depending on facts. He is really, his actions are really guided by his political motivations, and that is what we have said. You know what the official spokesperson said.
All right.
The charges are absurd and motivated.
Mr. Sajjanhar, thank you for joining us. I know you got to go, but Puneet Sani, I'm just trying to again make sense of the sequence of events and why Mr. Trudeau chose to go public with this in the dramatic fashion in which he did, and now 4 days on, even in today's press conference, he hasn't provided any new piece of information which moves the story forward, which puts, as Terry Milewski repeatedly keeps saying, puts meat on the bone in terms of what evidence does he have to back up this claim of credible allegations of Government of India officials and their involvement in the killing of Nijar. But here's the thing. Nijar had a letter rogatory against him in 2016. The Interpol was alerted for a retcon notice against him the following year. And one of the commentators in Canada said this rather interestingly. There was, of course, this ongoing gang war that was happening in Surrey in British Columbia, where Nijar was based, between the Malik gang and the Nijar gang. And it's likely possible, and the most plausible explanation for his death was that he got caught in this gang war. But Trudeau, by doing what he has done, has conflated what is a local gang war into this massive international diplomatic standoff between Canada and India.
Right. So, okay, Zaka, maybe I can answer. So, 2 points. What Trudeau said about, rule of law and about himself, I will just give you an example. So, in 1985, when they bombed the airliner, that was the biggest act of aviation terror before 9/11. So, I'll tell you something that you would not believe that happened. After bombing in 1985, gravest act of aviation terror, in 1986, the very same guys, they were planning to take the Indian parliamentarians hostage and blow up the Indian parliament. This was called the Hamilton Plan. And they got it, they had the wiretaps that this is happening. And when this went to the court said, okay, everything is right, this is happening. But, there was some technicality, they were not ready to reveal the source, or the application for wiretap had some problem. That whole case was thrown out. It was real. They were trying to bomb the Indian parliament. Then the other thing I say, the guy who basically put the bombs on the plane, the woman, she gave a very credible testimony, and then there was also evidence from the FBI. This was very clear. Yes, this person has done it. The judge wrote, yes, what she's saying is very credible. But she always said, I'm terrified because they kill people and they have killed so many. So I and my children will be killed. So I will not testify in front of him.
Okay.
And this is the Canadian courts. If you basically terrify a witness, then the defense should suffer. But in Canada, the prosecution should suffer. So again, the judge says her testimony is very credible. What she's saying is verified, but we cannot accept this evidence. This is thrown away. That's how the bombers got away. And one point I will tell you about, particularly Justin Trudeau. Mm-hmm. So when he came before that in 2018, again there was a big fiasco here. And how he had brought a convicted Khalistani terrorist here. So how he decided to do was, at the time his NSA his name was Daniel Juan. So he tried to plant a fake report that actually Indian government is involved, that Khalistani is here. And then this became a big issue. At that time, the conservative leader was Andrew Scheer. So he had to take back. And that NSA had to basically resign in disgrace. So this is actually an evidence that Trudeau has a history of using the agencies of his government, national agencies, to get him out of personal fiascos.
Okay, so let me ask Brahma Chelani this. What I'm curious also is the response of Canada's allies, the Five Eyes allies as they call them, the UK, the US and Australia, three of whom have now reacted to this. On the one hand, none of these countries have publicly condemned or asked India questions like the way Trudeau is. They've not condemned India for its alleged role or whatever. They have said, we are waiting to see more evidence from Trudeau. And yet at the same time, they've been very cautious to say that we hope that the Indian investigators also cooperate so that justice is brought in this case. I'm curious to know, this evidence or this allegation that Mr. Trudeau talks about, wouldn't he have to share this with his Five Eyes allies as per that treaty, the intelligence sharing treaty? And what does it say of the quality of this evidence if it's already been shared that none of these countries are publicly willing to condemn India for this?
You raise a very valid question, Zaka. First, the so-called evidence that Trudeau has is not evidence that police in Canada have collected from any investigation because they're still looking for suspects.
Correct.
He's relying on inputs from the murky world of espionage. In the murky world of espionage, the spy games center on geopolitics, and truth is the major casualty. Obviously, his intelligence is very thin. The fact that in normal course, these 5 Anglosphere countries band together for their common benefit, and if one country has a problem, then all the other 4 countries join hands, and the 5 countries then issue a joint statement. Nothing of this kind has happened.
Correct.
But there's a larger point that we should not forget, that even though Trudeau's government feels isolated at the moment, with not a single ally of Canada coming to the defense of the Trudeau government or joining his campaign against India, we should not forget that even though Trudeau's allegation has brought Indo-Canadian relations to their lowest point ever, India has a larger problem. And the larger problem that India has concerns all the 5 Anglosphere countries, because these 5 Anglosphere countries are all sheltering Sikh extremists that endorse violence as a legitimate tool to achieve Khalistan. We had the militants storming the Indian High Commission in London.
Yeah,
we had dual attacks on the Indian consulate in San Francisco in March. And so even though the focus today is on Canada, we should not forget that India faces a larger problem. And the issue that we should be discussing is how can India exert sustained pressure on the 5 Anglosphere countries, Britain, the US, Canada, Australia, and to a small extent New Zealand, so that these militants who are operating from their territories, when they promote or glorify terrorism,
all right,
these countries act against them.
All right. I'm sorry I'm having to curtail the debate here because the Prime Minister is speaking in the Rajya Sabha right now. This is at the conclusion of the Women's Reservation Bill debate. Let's go straight in.
दलों ने एक बहुत बड़ी अहम भूमिका निभाई है। नारी शक्ति को एक विशेष सम्मान सिर्फ विधेयक पारित होने से मिल रहा है ऐसा नहीं है। इस विधेयक के प्रति देश के सभी राजनीतिक दलों की सकारात्मक सोच होना, ये हमारे देश की नारी शक्ति को एक नई ऊर्जा देने वाली है। एक नए विश्वास के साथ राष्ट्र निर्माण में योगदान देने में नेतृत्व के साथ आगे आएगी। ये अपने आप में भी हमारे उज्जवल भविष्य की गारंटी बनने वाली है। आदरणीय सभापति जी, मैं इस सदन का समय ज्यादा लेता नहीं हूं। मैं सिर्फ जो भावना आपने व्यक्त की है उसके लिए आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। और जब मतदान होगा तो मेरा आप सबसे आग्रह है कि ये उच्च सदन है, चर्चा भी उत्तम करने का प्रयास हुआ है। अब मतदान भी सर्वसम्मति से करके हम देश को एक नया विश्वास दें। इसी अपेक्षा के साथ मैं फिर एक बार सबका हृदय से बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूं।
I shall now put the motion regarding consideration of the bill to vote. The question is that the bill further to amend the Constitution of India as passed by Lok Sabha be taken into consideration. Those in favor will please say aye. Those against will please say no. I think ayes have it.
संबंध से हुआ है ये स्पष्ट करना चाहता हूं.
Point well noted. Very heartening together. The entire House, the upper house, the House of Elders is unanimously united on this point. Honorable members, in spite of such unanimity, there is a constitutional prescription. Under Article 360 of the Constitution, the motion will have to be adopted by a majority of total membership of the House and by a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of the House. I'm coming. Eh? Just wait. I'm going as per procedure. Have patience. You can't put the cart before the horse. Present and voting. Division. Let the lobbies be cleared. Secretary General will now explain the voting procedure. Would you take your seat now? Honorable members, it is a constitutional prerogative. Please, I am so happy Mr. Chidambaram has given right counsel, and that is for a change. Secretary General will now explain the voting procedure.
Honorable members, for your convenience, I shall explain the voting procedure by automatic vote recording system. It may please be noted that each member has a multimedia device, MMD for short, at his desk. This MMD has an integrated mic and voting console containing 3 buttons: yes for ayes, no for noes, and abstain on the right-hand corner. There is also a separately situated button, Vote Secure, provided on the bottom left-hand corner of the multimedia device. In order to further facilitate the members, I will now explain the step-by-step method and precautions to be followed by each member in casting their votes. Step 1, I will announce that the voting process will start now. Step 2, the voting process starts and ends with a gong on a large screen hall display in the 2 corners of the chamber. The countdown time of 10 seconds in reverse counting order will be visible to the members on their respective multimedia devices. Members can cast their votes by pressing the Vote Secure button available on the bottom left-hand corner of their devices and keeping it pressed. Simultaneously press one of the yes, no, abstain buttons of his or her choice. For easy identification, these voting buttons have been indicated on your devices as green for yes, red for no, yellow for abstain. A word of caution here, the Vote Secure button should be pressed only after the gong sound. I repeat, only after the gong sound. Step 4, each member must keep the Vote Secure button as well as one of those yes, no, abstain buttons pressed simultaneously for 10 seconds. That is, at the time of closing of voting to register a valid vote. Step 5, once the valid vote is registered, the LED of voting button pressed by the member will remain on lighted up on their devices. At the time of casting the vote, if the members observe that the LED of yes, no, and abstain buttons are simultaneously blinking, it means that their vote is not being registered. Therefore, they shall immediately release the voting button pressed by them without releasing the vote secure button and have to press again within the 10-second period to register a valid vote. Step 6. During the voting period, the member can change his or her vote at any time. The button pressed at the time when the voting period is ending, that is, at the 10th second, will be recorded. In case either one or both the buttons are released prior to the close of the voting period, the vote will not be registered. If a member finds that he or she has voted by mistake by pressing the wrong button, he or she can be allowed to correct the mistake through a correction slip devised for the purpose, provided he or she brings it to the notice of the chairman before the result of the division is announced. The correction slips will be distributed to the honorable members who desire to correct their recorded vote by the officials of the secretariat.
Yes,
I will.
The Secretary General may now explain voting procedure in Hindi.
माननीय सदस्यगण, आपकी सुविधा के लिए मैं स्वचालित मतांकन प्रणाली द्वारा मतदान प्रक्रिया समझाऊंगा। कृपया ध्यान दें कि प्रत्येक सदस्य की मेज पर एक मल्टीमीडिया डिवाइस एमएमडी लगाया गया है। इस एमएमडी में इंटीग्रेटेड माइक और वोटिंग कंसोल लगे हैं, जिसके दाईं और कोने में 3 बटन हैं, हाँ के लिए यस, ना के लिए नो और एब्सटेन। इस मल्टीमीडिया उपकरण एमएमडी के निचले बाएं कोने पर अलग से एक बटन वोट सिक्योर भी दिया गया है। सदस्यों की और सुविधा हेतु मैं अब प्रत्येक सदस्य द्वारा अपना मत डालते समय अनुसरण की जाने वाली विधियों और सावधानियों को 4 चरणवार समझाऊंगा। चरण 1, मैं घोषणा करूंगा कि मतदान प्रक्रिया अब शुरू होगी। चरण 2, मतदान प्रक्रिया सभा कक्ष के दोनों कोनों में लगे बड़े स्क्रीन हॉल डिस्प्ले पर गोंग ध्वनि से शुरू होगी और समाप्त होगी। उल्टी गिनती के क्रम में 10 सेकंड की उल्टी गिनती का समय सदस्यों को उनके मल्टीमीडिया उपकरणों पर दिखाई देगा। चरण 3, सदस्य वोट सिक्योर बटन अपने उपकरण के निचले बाएं कोने में उपलब्ध है को दबाकर और उसे दबाते हुए अपनी पसंद के यस, नो, एब्सटेन बटन में किसी एक बटन को भी एक साथ दबाकर अपना मतदान कर सकते हैं। आसानी से पहचान में आने के लिए आपके उपकरणों पर इन मतदान बटनों को यस हरे, नो लाल और एब्सटेन पीले रंग में प्रदर्शित किया गया है। वोट सुरक्षित बटन को गोंग ध्वनि के बाद ही दबाया जाना चाहिए। मैं रिपीट करना चाहूँगा, गोंग ध्वनि के बाद में ही वोट सुरक्षित बटन को कृपया दबाएं। चरण 4, वैध मत दर्ज करने के लिए प्रत्येक सदस्य को वोट सिक्योर बटन के साथ यस, नो, एब्सटेन बटन में से एक को 10 सेकंड अर्थात मतदान बंद होने के समय तक के लिए एक साथ दबाए रखना होगा। चरण 5, एक बार वैध मत दर्ज हो जाने के पश्चात सदस्य द्वारा दबाए गए बटन की एलईडी उनके उपकरण पर जलती रहेगी। मतदान करते समय यदि सदस्य यह पाते हैं कि यस, नो, एब्सटेन बटन की एलईडी एक साथ ब्लिंक कर रही है, तो इसका मतलब है कि उनका मत दर्ज नहीं हो रहा है। इसलिए वे स्वयं द्वारा दबाए गए मतदान बटन को तुरंत छोड़ दें, वोट सिक्योर बटन को छोड़े बिना, और तत्पश्चात वैध मत दर्ज करने के लिए 10 सेकंड की अवधि में पुनः बटन को दबाएं। चरण 6, मतदान अवधि के दौरान सदस्य किसी समय अपना मत बदल सकते हैं। मतदान की अवधि समाप्त होने के समय अर्थात 10वें सेकंड में दबा कर रखे गए बटन का मत ही दर्ज होगा। यदि मतदान अवधि समाप्त होने से पहले कोई एक या दोनों बटन छोड़ दिए जाते हैं तो मत दर्ज नहीं होगा। यदि किसी सदस्य को पता चलता है कि उन्होंने गलती से गलत बटन दबाकर मतदान कर दिया है तो उन्हें गलती सुधारने के उद्देश्य से तैयार की गई सुधार पर्ची के माध्यम से गलती को सुधारने की अनुमति दी जा सकती है, परंतु इसके लिए उन्हें मत विभाजन का परिणाम घोषित किए जाने से पूर्व इसे सभापति के ध्यान में लाना होगा। अपने दर्ज मत को सही करने के इच्छुक मान्य सदस्यों को सुधार पर्चियां सचिवालय के कर्मचारियों द्वारा वितरित की जाएंगी।
Honorable members, I would like to inform you that as we are doing voting electronically, honorable members would have to be seated in their respective seats. Honorable members from Lok Sabha may like to occupy the vacant seats indicated so on the multimedia device. Alternatively, they may sit in the space between the two seats. The question is that the bill further to amend the Constitution of India as passed by Lok Sabha be taken into consideration. Those in favor will please say aye. Aye. Those against will please say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Division. Secretary General.
Honorable members, I am starting the voting process. The voting time starts now. इधर विजय
हाँ हाँ वो दे रहे हैं, सब दे रहे हैं। सब कुछ मेंबर्स का रिकॉर्ड नहीं हुआ। ये रिकॉर्ड रख लेना ना, 171 याद रख लेना, क्योंकि ऐड करने पड़ेंगे इसमें। इलेक्ट ऐड
फर्स्ट वोटिंग लिख दीजिए ऊपर, फर्स्ट वोटिंग लिख दीजिए ऊपर पेंसिल से। दीपक, ये फ्रंट रो पूरा नहीं हुआ है, जरा देखो जरा। सीट नंबर से देख लीजिएगा, टैली कर लीजिएगा, कहीं ज़्यादा नहीं हो जाए। नहीं नहीं, हाँ वही वही। कितना टोटल अटेंडेंस थी? 202।
To seek permission from the
only 31 are missing। हाँ तो कितने हैं काउंट कर लीजिए। नहीं मैं कह रहा हूँ इधर देवे।
इनका इंटरनेशनल कुछ ये है।
It's a historic moment as the Women's Reservation Bill. It's a landmark bill and will, of course, it aims to reserve 1/3 of the seats in Lok Sabha and state assemblies. A monumental day for the entire country as the bill is finally going through the Rajya Sabha. For more details, I'm joined in by our senior political editor Pallavi Ghosh on the phone line. Pallavi, take us through what happens now after the bill will be passed through the Rajya Sabha.
Well, then it has to actually matter of procedure goes back to the state for ratification, which is essentially a technicality because the states will have to implement the bill at their level also. And then, of course, there's a notification which comes in from the president, which gives the stamp of it becoming a law. But, you know, it's still going to be a long process because it will be based and has to wait for the delimitation commission to submit its report, which may not happen before 2026. And it's after that, the earliest timeline which the government says is 2029. But yes, I agree, this is a landmark, definitely a legislation which has taken place, because in 2010 it was passed in Rajya Sabha, the same Rajya Sabha where the voting procedure is going on, but it could not go to Lok Sabha because of lack of consensus. In this case, it's been cleared in Lok Sabha, should be cleared in Rajya Sabha anytime now, and therefore finally that frontier has been breached from a journey which began in 1996.
Absolutely, and very rightly mentioned by you, Pallavi, that the majority of the state assemblies will be also deciding. But when we talk about